right, so let's go ahead and get started with the webinar. So thanks everyone again for joining. This is the webinar, How to Move an Entire Project Between Sites, Leveraging DevOps and Salto for Jira. My name is Scott Dixon. I'm a customer engineer here at Salto. I'm based in the New York area. And I'm looking forward to talking with you all a bit today about how to leverage DevOps for Jira, and specifically how to move a project in terms of its configurations across environments and sites with Salto. A couple of housekeeping. We will be recording the session. So and then after the session, we will follow up with some helpful links as well as a copy of the recording. We are using Zoom for this webinar, and Zoom has a chat function. So if you have any questions, comments, anything that you'd like to share, please feel free to use the chat to submit those. We've also have a specific Q&A section, and that as part of the Zoom webinar. So if you find the Q&A and you submit a question there, we will make sure to get that answered throughout the session. And we will also leave questions. We will also have a section at the end of the webinar specifically for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them throughout, and we will also save some time at the end to address some of those questions. And then just for timing, we have the full hour kind of reserved here, but it really depends on questions. So if there are a lot of questions, we'll probably go for the full hour, but if not, we'll probably leave a couple minutes early. So yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So before we get started specifically at Jira, I wanted to share just a little bit about Salto and kind of the problems that we're looking to solve here. So with Salto, I've realized that SaaS applications run the modern company. There's a lot of SaaS applications that are behind modern enterprises, whether that be ticket management platforms like Jira, CRMs like Salesforce, financial applications like NetSuite, and so on. There's a lot of different SaaS applications. All of these applications require deep customizations to be able to fit the needs of your company. And many times these applications are customized using no or low code tools. And that's great because it makes them easy to update, easy to manage. But managing these do come with some challenges of their own because they are low or no code. Maybe it makes it a little bit easier to update, but it can be a little bit trickier to figure out whether or not those changes have made their way from a sandbox to a production environment, comparing the changes across environment, as well as understanding the impact of making a change. Which is why Salto, we've built the platform to be able to leverage these DevOps principles for IT and business applications. So allowing you to adapt the best practices and tools from DevOps into how businesses and IT applications are managed today. So in the context of today, we're talking about Jira and how you can use Salto to manage your Jira application. All right, so I am logged into my Salto account, and I'm going to walk through the platform and give you a demo about how I could move an entire project from my sandbox environment up to my production environment. Now, to get started, I just wanted to share a little bit about kind of how the Salto platform works. So Salto works by connecting to a Jira environment, and that can be a sandbox environment, a production environment, and then runs a fetch to pull down all of the configuration metadata. So in our documentation, which we will make sure to get a link to you after this call, our documentation will outline all the different configuration metadata types that we support. But just to kind of give you a short kind of preview about the types that we support, think of them as most of the out-of-the-box Jira configuration elements, like the projects themselves, screens, all the different schemes, workflow schemes, screen schemes, issue type schemes, filters, statuses, all of the key configurations themselves. We do also support JSM projects. So not only the JSM project, but queues, forms, request types, all of the configurations within them. And then if you're leveraging the script runner plugin, Salto can also pull in the scripts related to script runner, related to, for example, maybe you have a post function, things like that. Salto can pull all that in. So again, we're talking about the configuration metadata, and Salto will run a fetch to pull down all the configuration metadata, and you'll see it in your Salto account. So here I've already connected my sandbox environment. Now for the demonstration, I'm going to be using my sandbox environment here and then this production environment. Salto can connect to a number of different environments. If you did have multiple sandboxes that you were leveraging or multiple production instances that you were leveraging, you would be able to connect each of those to Salto, and you can also move configurations between all of them. And I just saw we had our first question. So just as a reminder, if you do have any questions, please feel free to jump into the Q&A and submit your questions. So Vishnu had a question: is Salto an add-on that can be installed from the Atlassian App Store, or is it a standalone software? Great question. So Salto is a standalone SaaS application. However, it is available from the Atlassian marketplace in that it leads you back to Salto, but the app itself is a standalone application. Now coming back into Salto, once you've run the fetch in Salto, you'll be able to see all the configurations that make up an instance. Now, I'm going to cover projects in the sense of both a software project and a JSM project, so I'm going to kind of flip between the two. But if you have any questions, anything that needs clarification, please just let me know in the chat. But if I take a look at, for example, a project here in Salto, we're going to differentiate between your JSM projects, so the service desk projects, as well as the software projects. But if I take a look at one of my software projects, I've got one of these in my sandbox environment, and I'll be able to pull this up in my Salto environment, and I can see kind of like the basics of how a project is set up. So the schemes that are attached to it, anything that is any automations, board, or filters that are being leveraged by that project. And you can also click through to see how any of those are also set up. So for example, I've got this project. Let me take a look at its workflow scheme. So I can click through to see its workflow scheme. I can see any of the specific workflows that are set up here. If I wanted to dig into one of these workflows, I could click through to see how it's set up. And then I can see any of its dependencies. That is, is it using some custom statuses, some custom fields? In this case, it's using 4 statuses, a field and a resolution. So I can really get some pretty good insights about the current setup of my environment. Now, we can do the exact same thing for a JSM project as well. So I've got this JSM project called IT request. You notice in Salto, it looks somewhat similar. Now, obviously, some of the configuration types are a little bit different, but you can see that the project is still tied to any of its related schemes. And then at the bottom, you'll be able to see any automations, filters that are tied to it, and then you can see all of the forms, calendars, portal groups, settings, queues, request types, SLAs, and so on that are tied to that JSM project. So it depends on what type of project that you're managing, but you'll be able to see all of the key metadata within there. Now, this explore type of view is available in Salto as soon as you connect and authenticate and run that fetch, and then you can pull down everything related to that environment. Now let me jump right into the deployment, but before I do that, just to kind of set the stage about what I'm going to do here is I've created this project. So this IT request, this is a JSM project in my sandbox. And then I also have a software project called Backlog. And it's a project that sits in my sandbox environment. So I would like to move the configuration of that project up into my production environment. So that's what I'm going to walk through in the demo today. Now, the example I'm going to do is going to be pushing a new project. So this is a brand new project, and I'm going to be basically copying that same project configuration into my production environment. But Salto also works the other way around. Let's say that you have a project that has been built directly in production. You want to mirror those changes in Sandbox to keep everything aligned. You can do the same type of development or the same type of deployment with Salto, as well as push projects in between different production sites. So a number of different ways that you can move them around, but in Salto, it's going to look relatively similar. So I jump right into the compare and deploy section within Salto. The first step is going to create a comparison. So since I am going from my sandbox environment to my production environment, I'm going to select the sandbox as my source. And I am going to select my production as the target. I'm going to call this add new project and create a new comparison. Now, as soon as I create this new comparison, Salto is instantly going to show me all of the differences between these two environments. Now, this is every single difference that makes up these two environments from a configuration standpoint. So an easy way to think about this is, remember the source and the target that I chose before, the source being sandbox, the target being production. So these changes are from the perspective of, if I want production to mirror sandbox, these are the number of changes it will take for that to happen. So there's 553 differences. Of that, 239 are net new additions, 130 are modifications, and so on. Now with Salto, you can also filter. You can see here, I actually instantly filtered from show me all the differences to show me all the net new or the addition type of changes. And then from here, I can add additional filters. For example, show me only the net new projects. So this is going to show me all the new projects. So actually I have quite a few projects that are sitting there in my my sandbox instance that have not been moved to production yet. Now, one thing to note here is you can also export all of these differences as a CSV file, and this export is going to take into account any of the filters that you've enabled. So in this case, because I'm on additions and I'm only looking at my projects, this list will contain all of the net new projects. So this is also a great place to come ahead of a sandbox refresh. So in case before you create a new sandbox with Jira, if you do want to see kind of what are those differences, what are the potential elements within my sandbox environment that might get wiped before doing so, this is a great place to come. All right, so now I'm ready to actually choose some changes to move to production. So I'm already in the additions tab, and then down here, I can actually go straight to the project. Now, again, like you saw on the previous screen, within Salto, you'll see if you do have both JSM and software projects within the same Jira site, you'll see them in two different places. Obviously, if you have either JSM or software projects, you'll just see one or the other. Now, I'm going to walk through a software project first, and then I will walk through a JSM project. So the first thing is my software project. Now, the one that I'm going to take a look at is this backlog project. So let me go ahead and fill this out. One thing to note is that within Salto, when you are doing a comparison and deploying elements, there's an open in Jira button. So you can always open this directly up in that source or that target environment, depending on what type of change that you're looking at. This can be a great way just to do a double check, just to make sure that these are the configurations that you're looking to move. Now I'm going to go ahead and choose this project. And as soon as I add this project, you'll notice that this required dependencies and these additional dependencies tabs or sections start to populate. What this is doing is Salto is using the information that we understand about the the configurations and the configurations and the target environment. Excuse me. And we're going to flag any dependencies that as required if they don't exist in the target environment yet. So using this project as an example, take a look at these schemes. I've got a workflow scheme, issue type scheme, and issue type screen scheme. So these are all schemes tied to this specific project. Obviously, they don't exist in the target environment yet. So I've got to add these. And then at the bottom, I've got some additional dependencies. Additional dependencies think of them as you could move the configuration without, and it would still work, but you still have some things tied to it. So it might be a good idea to also move these as well. So in the case of a software project, I've got some boards, filter, issue layout, automation. So these are all optional, but usually if you're wanting to move everything kind of all in one go with in terms of a project, you would go ahead and select everything. Now I've selected everything from the kind of that first layer of dependencies, and Salto is doing dependency analysis every single time that you add something to the to be deployed, and we're going to populate those dependencies under, or we're going to run dependency analysis, and then populate any missing dependencies under this tab here. This is going to be the same type of kind of required dependency. These are dependencies that don't exist yet in the target environment. So in this case, I can see that, well, I added this this particular screen, so I need to also add this screen that's being referenced to it. I also need to add the screen schemes. I need to add the workflows that are part of the workflow scheme. This is pretty common, especially if you have a really complex project with a lot of different dependencies, lots of custom fields, lots of different custom field contexts. You might have a number of different dependencies. So just make sure that you check this tab here. And this actually I should be good to go for this software project. So I could go ahead and move forward with the deployment process at this stage because I have everything that I need. But I want to actually also add everything about that JSM project that I was mentioning. So let me go back down. I'm going to go straight to the additions, go to my project, and open up all of my JSM projects. So I already have this one open, and here is that project. So I'm going to add this project to be deployed, and as expected, there's a number of different required dependencies. So project components, and then all of the mandatory schemes. So I'm going to go ahead and add all of those required dependencies. Now, under the additional dependencies, this is where Salto will call out again anything that's being referenced by the project, but it may not be absolutely necessary because it's not necessary for that specific project. But if you want to get it in one go, I would recommend reviewing these and also moving them up into the target environment too. Now, in this case, I'm going to add all the queues. I can go ahead and add the portal settings, the portal group. Now, do you notice that there's two forms associated with this project? I actually just want to add this one because I have some additional work being done in this form. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this form in my sandbox for now, and I can deploy that change later. So Salto does allow you to granularly select which changes you want to deploy into that target environment, like in this case where I'm only going to be moving one form. And then I see a filter, and then there's a number of automations. So again, I can select which ones that I want, but it looks like I've got everything I need here. And then because I've added like a number of schemes and then a form, it looked like it needed a request type. We've got some additional dependencies. Great. Another question from the chat. So Mark is asking, is this only for cloud to cloud migration? Can we do it to server to server migration as well? Great question. So right now, Salto supports Jira Cloud. We also support Jira Data Center. So we support cloud to cloud, and we also support data center instance to data center instance, but not in between them. And then we don't support server for right now. Let me just go ahead and add some missing dependencies, and looks like we got everything to go. So I selected that, just to kind of review what I did here. I selected my JSM project. I also selected that software project and all of its required dependencies, as well as a majority of those additional dependencies, just depending on what I needed to do. And then the next step with Salto is to create a deployment preview. So this is where Salto takes a look at everything that you selected, and essentially just validates, make sure that these are changes that we indeed can make to the target environment. And Marcus, I saw your question. How about cloud to DC? So not right now. So we can support cloud to cloud and DC to DC, but not cloud to DC. That being said, you can actually open up this comparison between like a cloud and DC instance. It's not really possible to deploy between, mostly because the APIs are quite different between cloud and DC instances. The data, the way that, like for example, workflows and projects are structured are quite different as well. So there's not the deploy capabilities, but you could do some high level comparisons, just understanding what's already made its way from your DC instance. If you're doing a migration to cloud, you could run that comparison, see the differences between the two. Now at this deployment preview stage, this is where Salto is going to basically run the validation, see if there's going to be any issues with the instances with that you've selected. Some common issues, like for example, here it's saying that I've got some users that are referenced in this element but don't exist in the target environment. In other words, my user is actually, I have a different user in production. So Salto has a specific configuration to be able to kind of update users in case they don't exist in the target environment. So this is what this is warning about. But in this case, none of these deployments are actually blocking me from deployment. They're just warning me that we're going to be overriding some usernames. There's going to be a couple fields that might need to have some manual overrides after the deployment process, but for the most part, we'll be able to deploy if necessary or as required. So actually, before I make this change, I want to get another resource to show you, because you'll notice right now I've just titled this a pretty simple name of add new project. Now, let's say that I have a Jira ticket that I'm using to kind of track the progress of this request to add this new project to prod. And I've got a Jira ticket and I want to reference it here. So I can just go ahead and update the title of this deployment to use that ticket ID. And then later on, Salto, through the integration with a Git provider like GitHub or GitLab, as well as the integration with Jira, you'll be able to get your Jira ticket updated to have it take note of the deployment that happened within Salto. So it's a great way to have a request come in, track all the work that's being done on that request, and get it automatically synced with the deployment in Salto. All right, so now I am ready to actually deploy these changes. So everything that I did up until this point didn't actually make any changes on either the source or the target environment. But as soon as I click that deploy button, this will actually start to push those changes into my production environment. And I've actually tagged my production environment as a sensitive environment. So it's just kind of give me that warning, like, are you sure that you want to make these changes? And in my case, I do. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy these changes. Now, as soon as the deployment is done, we will get a deployment summary. This deployment summary is going to show me all of the elements that were deployed. If I do run into any errors, Salto is going to show me what that error was and give me some kind of tips on how to fix that in a future deployment. Some common errors might be trying to push a project that has the same project ID as an existing project in the target environment. And then while this deployment is running, Vishnu had a question. Is there a free trial license that you could provide for our internal review of the software? So a 30 days free trial? Yes, so we do have a free trial that you can open. We will follow up after the webinar with a little bit more information about how to get started with the free trial. Also, during the free trial, you'll be able to use kind of the full breadth of the Salto platform. So you can do a full evaluation. And then the deployment is continuing to run. So just to let you know, kind of the duration of the deployment really depends on what's being deployed, kind of the volume of deployments. If you're trying to deploy a lot of workflows at once, that can take a little bit longer. And then while the deployment continues to run here, I wanted to share some of the results from the poll. So for the first question, how often do you make changes in Sandbox first? So there were 4 questions or 4 answers. So about 27% of you said that you are making all changes in Sandbox first. The second question, about 27% of you also said that only key changes are being made in Sandbox. 9% of you said almost no changes are made to Sandbox first. And then about 36% of you are not using Sandbox at all. And then for the second question, how aligned is your Sandbox with changes made in production? So about 18% said it's 100% aligned, which is great. That's really good to hear. And then about almost half said partially aligned, and then about 36% of you said not aligned at all. And then for the question about how are changes to production documented, it was actually a straight 50% answer here. So 50% of you said that you're using Jira tickets or another ticketing system to document changes that are being made to production. And then about 50% of you are using Confluence or another collaborative documentation platform to document those changes. So for those of you that are using Jira tickets, this is where Salto will come in pretty handy because we are able to reference any Salto deployments with changes that are being made with the Jira ticket directly. Now, after the deployment is done, this is where Salto is going to let you know about all of the changes that were deployed, if any failed to deploy, which in my case, actually I did hit some errors here. So these were the 9 issues that caused some issues for some of the deployments. It looks like there were some issues with the request type that I was trying to push, which had a cascading effect of impacting the rest of the elements that I was trying to deploy. Now with Salto, you're able to click on fix deployment and move on and get those deployed in a future deployment, and it will link back to the original deployment. So you'll always be able to keep everything kind of documented in one go. Now, after you deploy those changes, you can also connect Salto with a Git repo, like for example, in GitHub or GitLab, Bitbucket, any of the major Git providers. And Salto will push up all of the changes that were made on a branch that represents that particular environment with the specific changes that were made. So these are very granular details about the specific changes that were made with that specific deployment. And it's a great way to kind of automatically document your changes and then give very granular documentation of those changes that are made. And when I come back to the compare and deploy here, and I go to the history, this will show me a history of all of the deployments that have happened to this particular environment. This can also be exported as a CSV file, but it does kind of sit there on their own to use for a documentation standpoint, as well as if you are using the Jira ticket integration, you can also update your Jira tickets with information about the deployments that are happening from within Salto. So it's a great way to keep everything documented. And then on top of having the documentation in Salto, we've also have the ability to monitor changes that are happening directly in production. So this is where you can set up monitors on specific types of configurations. And every single time that Salto runs one of the fetches, it is going to send you an alert in case that any of these are triggered. So for example, I've got a monitor set up that anytime an automation or workflow is removed directly in production, it's going to send me an email. We can also send this notification to Slack or to Microsoft, like a Microsoft Teams channel, or multiple emails. And you can also filter this to either, just in general, if anytime this change is made, or if this change is made specifically in Jira directly. So it's a great place to kind of know about all the changes that are being made. And I see there's a couple questions, so let me jump to the chat here. So Marcus had a question, does this also do user mapping? So for example, this specific user from one instance should be this user in a different instance. So not right now, Marcus. So for that use case, we have we do have a way to kind of do that manually for now. We are working on the capabilities to do a little bit more automation. So you can say that, anytime you pick up this domain or this type of user, automatically map it to this when deploying into this second environment. For now, this is manual, but this is something that we are working on to be able to do that a bit more automatic. And then I saw there's also a question in the Q&A. So Alan had asked, how does Salto handle Jira assets and asset custom fields? So great question, Alan. So with our JSM Premium support, while Salto doesn't pull in the assets themselves, we do pull in the object asset schemas. So you can manage those. And then I believe that I'd have to check about the asset custom fields, though. I'm not 100% certain if that is supported out of the box. But Alan, I will make a note of that and make sure that we follow up with you about that. All right, and then let me jump to the version control tab here. So just to kind of wrap up the way that Salto can help you document changes that are happening in production. So this version control tab here can be thought of almost like a change log. So this is keeping track of all of the changes that are getting pushed to production, primarily through deployments that are happening in Salto. But at the top here, if you can see, kind of small, but it says that there are 319 unpushed files. Now, what this means, if I click preview push, this is showing all of the changes that have happened directly in the production environment that have not been through a Salto deployment. They're showing up as unpushed because they're basically saying that there's files that have been updated, added, removed, but have not, what we're not tracking in Git yet, either through GitLab, Bitbucket, and so on. And if you click on preview push, Salto will show you all of the changes that we see. So for example, here I can see that a board has been modified, automation label has been added. These are all added manually directly to production. And if I do recognize these changes, I can go ahead and add a comment. I can also add in a Jira ticket to notify specific or to update those Jira ticket IDs with any information. And then as soon as you push that up, this version control tab will track that as well. So here you'll see a full list of all those changes, not only the changes that are coming from Salto, but also the changes that are coming directly from the environment as well. So this is also a great place to track all the changes that your admins are making, get alerted on changes that are made, but all around just a great way to keep track of those changes. So I did want to pause here for a little bit and see if anyone had any questions that haven't come up in the chat or the Q&A yet. All right, I see a Q&A. Okay, Vishnu is asking, is Salto applicable for just project/asset schema configurations? Are there any future enhancements coming up to move the data between environments? So thanks for asking, Vishnu. So right now, Salto is only really looking at the configurations. There are some other data migration tools out there that we would recommend you take a look at. Salto does not touch issue data, does not touch user data. So if you need to migrate that as part of moving a project as well, there are some plugins out there to do that. Right now, we don't have any immediate plans for really managing like data migration. By the way, we did get some questions from email earlier, and I want to make sure that we can answer a couple of those. So we got a question, what are all the types that Salto supports, request types, etc. We will follow up, by the way, after the call, but in the meantime, if anyone is interested, check out the Zoom chat here, and I'm going to post a link to all of the types that are supported, as well as the breakdown between what's supported in cloud versus what's supported in DC. And I had a question about whether we support Jira product discovery. So not right now, not one of the aspects of Jira that we support. And yeah, there was also a question about whether Salto is copying the issue data and comments as well from from sandbox to production or vice versa. So no, so right now, Salto is really just focused on the configuration metadata, so not the issue data or not like the comments on the issues. And Vishnu had a question: can Salto undo the published changes that were moved between environments? So yes, Salto can undo changes, and we can do that through what we call restore to a previous version. So the way that this works is that every single time that Salto runs that fetch, and these are fetches that can be ran manually at any time as well as on a schedule, so hourly, daily, weekly, these fetches are going to kind of serve as a snapshot that Salto can restore back to if you need to do it. You can see here, as soon as I select, let me show you again, if I come over to the compare and deploy and instead select the dropdown and select restore to your previous version, this is going to be a list of all of the different past snapshots that I have access to, and I can choose that to restore back to at any time. And what Salto is going to do is we're going to show you basically all of the differences between now and that point in time that you chose. And you can choose to restore back to whatever state that might be. So for example, let's say that you've made a number of changes to a workflow, updated its transitions, and you need to restore it back to that previous state because it's no longer working as expected. So you could choose, let's say I made these changes sometime last week, and I know that at least at June 14th, I had those changes. Those changes were not live yet. I could click on create deployment, and Salto is going to show me all of the differences between basically now and that point in time, and then I can select which of those changes I want to restore back to. So even though Salto will show you all the changes, you can select specific changes to move back to. And by the way, this works really well with our monitoring functionality. So for example, this automation or workflow removed notification that I have, just kind of pretend that I did have this come up, and actually I can show you an example about what type of this is the email that you'll get or the notification that you will get in Slack or Teams. It will say that these are the elements that were changed. These are these, and then it will attach a PDF full of more specific details. And then you could come back into Salto and say that restore to a previous version, select a previous point in time, and then you could restore those specific changes. And got a question here from Alan. Alan's asking, can Salto work between projects in JSM or on the same instance, like copying from one project to another, or does it need to be separate sites? Alan, that's a really good question. So the short answer is yes, that it's possible. The longer answer is it would require some updating of the files directly. It's not typically a use case that we come across a lot yet. But just to kind of show you in the compare and deploy, for example, this is my production environment. There's an option here called edit environment. And we'll make sure that you get some of this documentation after the webinar here. But basically what you can do is, because Salto is pulling down all the configuration metadata and turning it into a flat file structure, you can manipulate that file structure. So you can add new files, you can modify those files directly. This is something we recommend for like advanced use cases, our users that are very familiar and comfortable with Salto. But basically, in this case, what you could do is update some of those files to take the same changes that you had in one JSM project and apply them to another. And we got another question here. Would it be possible to include Jira workflow approvals and schedule runs to future dates for publishing changes to prod from staging? So yes, so Vishnu, that would be possible through our integrations with CI tools, like for example, GitHub Actions or GitLab CI. Essentially, the way that would work is that when you're running a deployment with Salto, Salto can then turn that deployment into a pull request that on that Git provider, which could then be used to trigger some sort of action, including scheduling deployment. So let's say that, like for example, that deployment that I just planned out to move the projects, I could potentially schedule that through a GitHub action to run maybe at the end of the day or run at another time. Just to recap, you can use Salto to move an entire project in terms of the configurations from sandbox to production. It's a great way to help you keep your sandbox in sync with production. Think of it, you can make changes, and if you are making changes directly in production, you can push those back down to sandbox to keep everything aligned so that you can actually leverage your sandbox environment as a testing and development environment. So start leveraging a sandbox, Jira sandbox today to de-risk making changes to production. And then here's a little bit more about staying in touch with us. Specifically, we have a QR code here that gives you information about how to sign up for our free trial, as well as we do have a free tier. That free tier includes one environment that you can explore. So there's no deployment capabilities, but you can at least explore what's currently set up, all of the dependencies, and so on. Vishnu had a question: are all older data center versions supported by Salto? I don't know about all older versions, but I know that we have. Let me check, Vishnu, and we can get back to you about the specific versions of data center that we support. And if there are no more questions, thanks again for joining, and we will be following up with some documentation, some more references, as well as a link to the recording of the webinar. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. Thanks for the great questions, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.